If you found this, you're not like most people. Most turn away when history gets too quiet, too cruel, too close to the skin. But you lean in. So welcome. You're safe here. Not because the story is gentle, but because it's true. And the truth, it leaves marks. Now listen closely, because this isn't just a story about Rome. It's a lesson in how power mourns, and how it recreates what it killed. Poppaea Sabina, wife of Nero, empress of the empire, pregnant, beautiful, obedient, and suddenly inconvenient. They say he kicked her, that it was an accident. It always is when the body is female and the man wears a crown. Her scream echoed across marble, but Rome did not move. She died. He wept. Then he rebuilt her, not with memory, with replacement. He called for oils, perfumes, sapphires, had her embalmed like a goddess. But grief is never about the dead. It's about the living and what they still want. And what Nero wanted was her, alive, breathing, obedient. So when he found a boy with skin like hers, he did what all rulers do when they regret too late. He turned someone else into a solution. That boy's name was Sporus. Power doesn't cry, it studies, it waits, it replaces. Nero didn't mourn like a man. He mourned like a strategist, calculated, composed. He didn't grieve to remember. He grieved to rebuild. And what he wanted back was Poppaea. So he reconstructed her absence into an opportunity. Designers were summoned, perfume makers. Silence was curated. This wasn't love. It was rehearsal. Then he saw the boy, pale, soft-featured, silent. Sporus didn't speak unless commanded. He didn't know that was his audition. He didn't know stillness could be a trap, that quiet can look like consent. Nero said nothing. He didn't need to. Silence pulls people in better than flattery. The boy didn't flinch, didn't ask why. And in a world of danger that made him safe, he had the right face, the wrong name. But names can be changed. He was summoned, not for his future, but for someone else's past. The emperor didn't want healing. He wanted a silhouette. They came for him without urgency. No guards, no threat, just a summons and silence. That's how true power moves. With calm, with certainty, with the illusion of invitation. Sporus didn't run, because boys like him were never taught to. He was escorted to a private chamber, bathed in rose water, shaved until the mirror didn't recognize him. No questions were asked. None were allowed. The seamstress measured him in silence. The physician examined him like an artifact. He thought it was ceremony, a performance, but it was preparation for something irreversible. He was dressed in a gown that used to belong to someone else, a woman, a queen, a ghost. He didn't understand, not yet, because power never reveals the full script at once, only your next line. And his next line was obedience. He stood still. He nodded when told. He thanked them for treating him like a mirror, still unaware that he had already been erased. Because Nero didn't need him to be ready. He only needed him to stop resisting. And when that moment arrived, when the boy finally surrendered to silence and silk, the knife came. A crown doesn't rest on the head. It rests on what has been taken. And for Sporus to become what Nero wanted, something had to be removed. The room was warm, clean, too quiet. That's how you know something irreversible is about to happen. They didn't restrain him. They didn't scream. They didn't need to. He had already been trained to obey the script without seeing the ending. It wasn't punishment. It wasn't ritual. It was correction. They said nothing. He said nothing. The blade did what words couldn't. He bled slowly, like memory leaving the body. And when it was over, he was praised, cleaned, perfumed, promised the silk he had already been given. A voice told him he was beautiful. And that beauty, they said, is best preserved when the body can no longer rebel. He wasn't a man, wasn't a woman, wasn't a servant. He was convenient. And convenience is the final stage before worship turns into display. He didn't scream, not because it didn't hurt, but because he didn't know if he was still allowed to. And there was no mourning veil, only a bridal one, no funeral bells, only a flute. Rome was summoned, senators seated, musicians tuned, not to bury the empress, but to marry her again. Sporus stood at the altar, not as himself, but as someone else's memory, wrapped in silk too delicate to protest. The garments were exact. Poppeia's original gown, her necklace, her perfume. Only the body inside had changed. He didn't speak. He didn't cry. He was trained to stillness. The emperor took his hand, lifted the veil, and kissed a face he had already replaced in his mind, not with love, but with control. The crowd did not gasp. They applauded because the empire had learned to confuse obedience with beauty. Sporus bowed his head, not out of reverence, but to avoid seeing the reflection of a life that wasn't his being performed in his skin. And from that moment on, he wasn't seen as a boy. He was seen as her, not in memory, but in function. Because sometimes a crown doesn't need agreement, only resemblance. They didn't just dress him, they curated her into him. Every garment had history, not just silk, but proof. This is what she wore to the festival. This necklace was her favorite. These shoes touched the temple floor. They told him the stories while sliding each piece onto his body, not to comfort him, to erase him. He wasn't learning how to be royal. He was being edited. They taught him how Poppaea walked, where she placed her hands, how she tilted her head to seem curious, even when she was tired. The maids corrected him gently, but repetition is rarely gentle when it's carving someone else into you. You're not supposed to smile like that. Your steps are too fast. She was softer than this. He stopped offering variations and became the replica. At court, no one said his name. They whispered hers, directed at him. He was no longer Sporus. He was Poppaea again. And as he stood by the emperor's side, draped in a woman's past, even the statues seemed to nod in agreement. Rome didn't care who wore the gown, only that it fit. And on Sporus, it fit perfectly. There are things too strange for whispers, and too public to be denied. This was one of them, the Roman Forum, where laws were made, where legends were carved in stone, where emperors stood tall. And now, a wedding veil returned. Nero did not hide it, he paraded it. Sporus stood beside him, gowned in white and gold, lashes curled, eyes lowered. A priest walked ahead, trumpets sounded, and Rome watched as the empress returned from the grave. In the shape of a boy, the emperor turned to him, held his face like it was sacred, and kissed him. Slow, public, final. The senators did not stop him. The guards did not flinch. The priests recited their blessings because the truth was now official. And in Rome, official truth is more powerful than moral outrage. The crowd called it devotion, but Sporus knew what it was. It was performance, with no lines, only costumes. He kept his eyes down because even statues were watching. And in that kiss, he vanished again. At first, it was fabric. Then it became language. Then it became thought. Sporus no longer corrected people when they called him her. He stopped remembering when the lie began. Because that's how a role becomes real. Not by conviction, by repetition. He was not expected to speak, only to nod, smile, tilt his head just the way she used to. The emperor was pleased. The court admired his devotion, but no one asked what it cost. He did not sleep through the night. He began dreaming in her memories, her gowns, her footsteps, her punishments. They became his inheritance, not of blood, but of burden. And still, he played the part, because in an empire like this, truth doesn't keep you alive. Obedience does. The role was too heavy, but letting it slip would be seen as betrayal, so he stayed inside it until the fabric felt like skin, until silence felt like safety, until forgetting felt like survival. When Nero died, Rome didn't fall silent. It cheered. Statues were torn down. Coins melted. His name became a curse. But Sporus remained. No title, no rights, just an illusion that still fit. He wasn't freed. He was transferred. The next emperor took him in, and the next, and the one after that. None of them wanted Sporus. They wanted what Nero made him into. A replica, a myth, a memory they could parade and possess. He was made to reenact mourning at mock funerals, throwing flowers into empty graves. They dressed him again, painted his eyes, laughed when he cried too soon. Power changed hands, but the costume stayed on. He was passed around like cursed jewelry, too expensive to destroy, too infamous to forget. Every room he entered asked him to perform a ghost, and every time he obeyed, he died a little more. There was no final performance, no silk, no veil, no priest reciting names that weren't his. There was only silence and a blade. Some say he took his own life. Others say it was done to him. History doesn't care, because either way, it wasn't news. It was just another forgotten ending for someone who was never allowed a beginning. There was no riot, no trial, only absence. And for once, that absence was his to create. No one dressed him. No one told him how to stand, how to smile, how to carry the grief of a woman he never met. He chose the moment. That was all he had left. It wasn't vengeance. It was stillness, the kind that comes when you finally stop pretending that you are something you never chose to become. And when they found him, there was no headline, no statue, no prayer, only the echo of a role, vacant, only a name, misused, only a body, finally his. History rarely asks who someone was before they were rewritten. It only records what they became under pressure. But there was a boy beneath the silk, not strong, not rebellious, just unready, unready to be studied, unready to be chosen, unready to be erased in plain sight while everyone called it beauty. He liked quiet places, listened more than he spoke, carried tea with both hands so it wouldn't spill. He didn't imagine power, didn't crave wealth. He wanted to be safe. And in Rome, that was already asking too much. And so he learned to nod, to mimic, to perform, until the mask hardened, and the world mistook it for his face. But deep beneath the layers, beneath the routines, the jewelry, the ghost-written identity, there was still a pulse that didn't belong to Pompeii, didn't belong to Nero. It belonged to him, even if no one ever learned what that meant. Even if history never bothered to ask, the empire didn't hide it. It put it on display. The kiss in the forum, the wedding parade, the silk gowns stitched to match a dead woman's outline. And Rome watched, not in horror, in curiosity. They didn't scream, didn't protest. They leaned in, because when power performs madness with confidence, most people applaud. It wasn't just Nero. It was the priests who blessed the wedding, the senators who attended the feast, the servants who passed the wine and said nothing while the child became a shadow. This wasn't one man's madness. It was a city's appetite for spectacle. They called it eccentric, romantic, a tragedy maybe, but never evil, because calling it evil would mean naming themselves. And so the show continued. Dress rehearsals became doctrine, and the illusion hardened into history, not because it fooled everyone, but because no one dared to say, this isn't a woman, this isn't love, this isn't right. They didn't burn him, didn't bury him with ceremony. They buried him in silence, not underground, but in the margins of history. No shrine, no statue, no name etched in marble, just absence. That was the final performance, and Rome played it well. They remembered Nero, the tyrant, the artist, the god who burned his own city. But Sporus, he became a rumor, a footnote, a strange line in a stranger's story. The empire erased him the way it created him, with intention, because to remember him would mean admitting what they allowed, that a boy was taken, cut, named, dressed, paraded, used, and discarded, not by accident, by design. He was a monument built from someone else's guilt. And when that guilt lost its crown, so did he. But you remember now. You heard him. And memory is a weapon too.